Welcome to Women of Steel with me, Miriam Grace, the podcast where women who've had their mettle tested help us make important links for ourselves. Millions are missing. Missing because of ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia and other similar illnesses, and the majority of sufferers are women and girls. Germaine Hypher has been chronically ill for decades, and I met her at a time in my life when I was bedbound. Germaine's kindness and generosity of approach stood out to me and was clearly born of her lived experience. During her childhood, where she was often too unwell to attend school, and then navigating divorce and being a disabled single parent in her 20s and early 30s, Germaine has been reliant on carers, with her daughter also being classed as a young carer. Throughout these difficult times over many decades, Germaine has been able to return to a sense of meaning and purpose through her poetry, writing and crafting. Sometimes losing sight of this for a while, and often only able to engage for a few minutes at a time. I've been exploring for myself and my clients the fine line between acceptance and hopelessness, and I wanted to speak to Germaine, author of the book Crafting a Path Through Illness, to understand some more about how we can be fulfilled and accept our limitations. We've actually made it, Germaine. Welcome. I'm so pleased to have you come on the podcast. And behind the scenes, of course, you and I have had to both do quite a bit of work to be able to appear here. So just for listeners listening, an awareness that Germaine has her strategies and I have my strategies for pacing our energy through this recording. So sometimes you might hear papers rustling, or we might pause just to close our eyes and recoup some energy. And I suppose this, in a way, is part of us being creative about our limitations and how we can still create this podcast for you to listen to. So welcome, Germaine. I know that you've had decades of experience of living with chronic illness, and obviously a question that often comes up in some of the Facebook groups that we're in, the support groups that we attend, are what can I do when I'm stuck in bed? Because one of the main symptoms of our health challenges are fatigue, concentration, brain fog. Some of us have quite a lot of pain. Even lifting a cup sometimes, or speaking. So when I was very severely affected, that's when I met you, and the bare minimum that I could include in my personal plan is that I felt I needed to do one thing that had meaning or heart to it every day, whether that was to send a voice note or a text to a friend, to watch the sunset, to stroke the cat, but something that made being alive worthwhile, because I'd survived a serious illness, and I didn't see what the point of surviving that was if all I was going to do was just be what felt at the time useless in bed. So I had to add this thing about meaning in, and I think that's something that really draws me to talk to you, and I've ordered my copy of your book, Crafting a Path Through Illness, because I feel like you get it. You get this thing that we need meaning, we need connection. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your experience of meaning, connection, and how it has worked and how it's not worked for you in your process.
It's changed a lot over the years. So if you consider that I started becoming ill when I was 8, which is very young. So at that age, you make meaning in every day. Children just they live in the moment, don't they? And just
Mm.
want to have fun and play. Whereas I think as adults, we've sort of put more pressure on ourselves to create meaning in more ways that are accepted by society, or that our lives have led us down the route of achievements, perhaps. So as a child, I just did what I could. If I was well enough to
Mm.
play a little bit, I did. And I was
Mm.
always, as a child, really into arts and crafts and writing. Right
Mm.
from the age 8, I wanted to be an author.
Mm.
So my mum, she was always my ally throughout the illness. She was the one who saw how ill I was. I didn't actually recognize how ill I was at all. I suppose because I'd just grown up with all the symptoms. I thought this was how everybody lived. I just thought this was what was being a human being.
Mm.
So I didn't actually really accept how ill I was, or even sort of process the reality of that at all. So I just would often do too much and, have worse spells, but would manage to incorporate life as a child, into my days. Um, as I got more ill, my mum did make sure that I had all kinds of activities to do, craft activities. So I remember one of the key ones that I really liked was, do you remember Fimo? I think people call it
Mm.
polymer clay now, but we
Yeah.
called it was Fimo when we had
Mm.
it.
Mm.
And that was a craft that I loved doing. Because it did require such little energy, I suppose.
Mm.
Looking back on it, it
Mm.
you didn't have to keep it wet, you didn't have to dampen it, you didn't have
Mm.
to knead it too hard, and they were in little
Mm.
tiny blocks of different colours. So
Yes.
there was no, it was just really simple. You just sit and fiddle with it, you have your arms rested on a pillow.
Mm.
So there were things like that she ensured that I had. And looking back on it, that definitely helped. And I had home tutors because I wasn't well enough to go to school. Um, but one thing that mum was very aware of is, you talk about finding meaning, and I think she was aware of that school alone, or your education, is really important, but it's not everything. It's not the be all
Mm.
and end all. And
Mm.
and there was so much fuss from authorities about trying to get me to school and that kind of thing. So mum was very aware that there needed to be something beyond that for me, like there would be for a healthy person. So
Mm.
there was a period in my teens when I was well enough to get to occasional classes. The school were really good at allowing me to just attend what classes I felt able to.
Mm.
Um, and I loved going, but we found out there was an extracurricular class, an after school patchwork and quilting club. And the school and mum were both really understanding, and they said, no, it's important that beyond academic, you have things beyond that. And so I was allowed to attend that class instead of academic classes, which
Mm.
I think was really understanding of the
Mm.
school. And I had one friend, and she used to go to that as well. So again, it maintained friendship, and it did give me that sort of a sense of self, um, beyond sort of the real basics of, like you say, surviving and um, our obligated kind of needs, or things that we have to do. So yeah, I think that, and then I got a little bit better late teens, not much better. It was
Mm.
more a case of me refusing to admit how ill I was,
Yes.
and I got pregnant
Mm.
and married, all in the space of a year. I think I met my husband, who was a lot older than me, and came and visited the house, and that's how I met him. It wasn't that I was getting out anywhere, but I did get pregnant, and I had my daughter when I was 20, and that's when my health plummeted.
Mm.
And I was
Mm.
then bedbound or mostly bedbound, not
Mm.
completely, but mostly for years. And that's when I had to accept how ill I was, and that I couldn't fake being well anymore. And um, and that was hard. And yeah, I wasn't able to look after her. I wasn't even able to have her in my room much just because of the
Mm.
movement of her.
Mm.
As she grew to toddlerhood, that was all too much. So that was really, really hard. And for
Mm.
me, at that point, being a mum was my meaning, was my purpose, and that was being stripped away from me by the illness. So
Yes.
that was really difficult.
Mm. It
Um,
sounds heartbreaking, Germaine.
it was very, very hard. Um, I did lose my way for a bit actually, and I was
Mm.
too ill to craft as well. I
Mm.
wasn't able, and also, I mean, I had actually, when having done my A levels at home, I had got a place in art college,
Mm.
um, and I kind of attempted it. It was a half-hearted attempt because I knew I wasn't well enough, but I went along and I
Mm.
went for a whole day. And at the end of the day, I was just like, this is so unsustainable. So I never
Mm.
made more than a day of it. So
Mm.
then in my early 20s, when I was a very young mum, lying in bed doing nothing, I was like, where am I? It had all just gone, it just dropped away.
Mm.
And
Mm.
and I didn't have internet then. I didn't have a mobile phone. I know some people did, but I was a little bit behind the times because I wasn't a part of society really.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have what we have now, the creative inspiration and the groups and
Mm.
people
Mm.
sharing artwork and tutorials online, none
Mm.
of that. So
Mm. Mm.
I didn't even know how to get into sort of, just aspects of crafting that I might have been able to do, although
Yes.
I was very, very unwell. I couldn't even really read at that point. Um, so yeah, there was a real sort of losing of myself and losing of my way.
Yes.
Um,
Really struck by your mum advocating
mm,
for you, and I think when you talk about the school's approach, I think it's very unusual, actually, even these
they were
days,
brilliant.
for schools to be like that,
Yes,
and it
it is. I know.
probably yeah. Mm.
No, sorry, I was just going to say, I know Mum had to fight hard to
Mm.
get home
Mm.
tuition for me.
Mm.
She fought that really hard. But that was sort of happening, I think, just before moving into secondary school.
Mm.
So I think, if I remember rightly, that was in place at that point, or if not, it was in the process of it.
Mm.
And so when I didn't actually go to the secondary school that I would have gone to because we have grammar schools and all sorts
Mm.
around here.
Mm.
So, but instead I went to the nearest one because it was literally right opposite our house, literally. So it meant I could get there
Fantastic.
easily if I was able to.
Mm. Mm.
And because they knew how ill I was put in, it was, divided into houses,
Mm.
actually all named
Mm.
after powerful women. So I was in,
Fantastic.
funnily enough, I was put in Nightingale House for Florence Nightingale, who, now is thought to have had ME back then. So
Mm.
that's
Mm.
interesting.
Mm.
But I was put in that house because the house head was known to be one of the most compassionate, sort of kindest teachers in the school, I think. And they
Yeah.
knew that she would give good pastoral care. So, and
Yeah.
she did. So I think that's what helped a lot. I was lucky that because there were some not nice teachers as well. I remember a maths teacher who
Yeah.
sort of commented to the class and I didn't like maths at all.
Mm.
But,
Mm.
if I could turn up for maths class, I would, because I just
Mm.
loved getting into school. And I do sort of remember a comment once about, me sort of arriving, she who just comes when she wants to, kind of thing,
Yes. Yeah.
which wasn't kind or helpful. But luckily, the ones sort of overseeing my care were very understanding and
Yeah. So,
with us.
I'm thinking for people listening, they might not have had an advocate like your mother. They
No.
might not have had a school or, the support that you had. And it's quite a brain switch to a different way of thinking in terms of what is success, what is
Yes.
living. That's a very important word.
Yes.
You're crafting your way through illness. It's a verb. You're doing
Yes.
something, and so I think that
We, I think there's this cliche that you create your life, and in sort of positive circles and healing circles and new age circles, that's very much a way of life. When you become very severely ill, or even mildly ill but chronically with something, you realize that actually it can be beyond your control. You can't
Yes.
create what you want, but everything has a kernel of truth in it, and so you can still create your own life around that. You may not, and I think this is the thing, people can get very, and I did for a while, very dejected that I didn't have power over the way my life, I was going to say looked, but the way, the direction my life was taking. But what I did have was power to create my own perceptions within that, and
Yes.
making the most of what I have. And
Yeah.
so that is where we do create our life. And that's why I like the term crafting a path. And very much, crafts are often what are available to us when other hobbies
Exactly.
have gone. And also, I think it can be seen as well as like, oh, all I can do is knit like a granny. And then you can't even do that because your arms are too weak and you can't hold the tension on the yarn or something. And you think, well, God, what am I good for? And then it becomes a case of, I think, broadening our idea of what creativity is and what crafts are, and sort of thinking, even just colouring is expressing ourselves through colour. Colours
Yeah.
affect mood and mind, and what we choose to colour or what we choose to draw expresses who we are. So if I can go back to an example in my 20s, when I did get well enough to, well, I have to say, actually, one thing I always managed to do was write poetry. And funnily enough, it seems to be that when my symptoms were at my worst, and even cognitively, no power at all. I mean, speech, I can lose the power of speech altogether, both cognitively and through muscles just being too weak and breath being too weak. And yet, lines of poetry can just ping in my head. So I've always written poetry, and has that it really helps to seize feelings and experiences that are inside
Yes.
and take them out of me. When they're feeling overwhelming, it's almost like, well, actually, an image has just come into my head. It's almost like a Victorian botanist, with their, oh, what were they called? That their glass domes. There's a word for that, a
Yes.
terrarium or something like that.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
like it takes the experience and the feelings and preserves them in there, and sets them aside. And that would take a degree of helpless panic away from me, because there used to be a sense of that this is so huge what I'm going through, and so big, and nobody understands it, and I don't have the words for it. And if I do find the words for it, I can't emit them because I'm not well enough, or there's not, or will I be able to convey it when a doctor asks, or when somebody needs to know? And so poetry, I found, was a form of creativity that helped emotionally, as well as just passing time and producing something, because that's another aspect of crafts that I think is really important. You're actually producing something tangible where you can
Yes.
sort of say, I existed, I was here, look, I made this. But very much writing did that for me when I was too unwell.
Yes,
Other
yes.
things.
And thinking about, this existence, that's a really important part of living with the health challenges that you have, is, because no one can see you.
No,
But if you have something tangible that you've created and you can see that, then it reflects back to
exactly.
you that you exist, whether it's a poem. And
Absolutely.
and I was also thinking the metaphor of crafting is really useful, because in crafting you use what's available. So
Absolutely.
it's like maybe you haven't got a fir cone for the Christmas decoration. Maybe you find something else. But
Totally.
it's about living the life that you can with what you have
Yeah,
around you.
but to come back to craft, that's where crafting can be really helpful, because they teach us those things as well. And when we are crafting and having trouble learning something, we can see that everybody gets in a tangle with the wool, or everybody has to rub out all their lines when they're drawing. And you can then sort of, whether you do it consciously or subconsciously, it kind of creates this feedback loop, and it kind of transfers emotional resilience and knowledge back and forth with how we deal with life in general, and how we learn with crafting, and we learn that we are capable of learning and becoming more than we first thought, and adapting, like you say, to what is around us, and what materials, or and what inner resources, and what limited energy we learn. It was, there's all this to and fro of learning to adapt to all of that, and also of expressing who we are. Like you
Yes.
said, we do feel invisible. And I do remember in my 20s, when I got well enough to sit up in bed a bit, and to um we got I we got me a laptop so that I could do a little bit of typing. And I suddenly had this idea, this vision for creating a magazine for families raising young children, or any age children, in nature-based lifestyle, because that was how I wanted to raise my child. And I wasn't able to do any of that with her. I was lying in a bed, unable to do things. But I could edit other people's work a little bit. I could put things together bit by bit. And so I did that. I created a magazine. It only came out twice a year, because that was all I was able to do. But it was for families. And so through that, I was able to express or demonstrate to the world and to myself that this is who I am. This, under the layers of illness and under the weight of all that illness, trapping me to the bed and making me unable to sort of perhaps smile and sing and skip through the forest or whatever else. This is who I am. This is what I believe in. And so that's what I did. And that had a lot of creativity in it, because it had songs and poetry and crafts and stories and puzzles and all sorts for the children, and then feature articles for the parents. And that was, and also I'd get my daughter to draw little illustrations for it. So it was a way of including her in something that I could do. And I also felt it was something that she could look back on later in life, that she has often. Now she's 28. Things never quite pan out how you think. But I thought it's something she can look back on and know that this is what mummy wanted to do with me. Turns out
Yes.
she kind of gathered that along the way anyway. She knew that anyway. But at the time, I wasn't confident that that would be the case.
Yeah.
And this magazine, it did go out. It sold in shops across the country, and subscribers, and even some dotted around the world. And there's one really strong memory I have of one reader sending a letter to the editor. I loved it when that happened, because it made me feel like a proper editor. I always felt like I was just playing otherwise. But there's this reader, and she was only in her early 30s, and she had two very young children. And she wrote to me telling me that she had stage 4 cancer, and that it was terminal. And I do know she did die soon after. And she wrote to me saying that she just wanted to let me know that she is putting together a memory box for her children to always have, and that she had had such lovely times reading the stories and doing some of the activities with her children, that some of the key pages that they would remember having done with her, she was putting in the memory box. And that just felt so meaningful. And at that point, I remember just thinking, I have done something with my life. And I have, from this bed where I barely talk to anybody, I have reached out and I have touched someone else's life, and their life has touched mine by hearing her story as well, and made me feel very humble. And there was just that real sense of I am doing something. I am affecting the world. You know, that sort of,
Yes.
is it called chaos effect? The
Yeah.
butterfly,
Yeah.
flaps its wings and
Yeah.
creates a storm.
Something. Yeah.
So, so
Mm.
yeah, something that I thought that was for me, was selfish for me, was
Mm.
just fun and something to do, was affecting others. And I did receive other letters saying that they had felt alone on their path in parenting and sort of a
Mm.
nature based, because this was over 20 years ago now. So
Mm.
it
Mm.
wasn't the norm back then.
Yeah.
And they felt a real need for this. And I was like, oh, I can have an effect. And I know that's quite a dramatic, dramatic's not the word, but not everybody's going to produce a magazine. That was quite, that was my particular vision.
Mm.
That
Mm.
but it doesn't have to be. It can, just knitting a hat for somebody who's homeless,
Yeah.
or sending
Mm.
a card, or like, I know I haven't had the energy to do it this year, but when I can, I like to do. Have you heard of Amnesty International's Right
Mm.
for
Mm.
Rights?
Mm.
And it's
Mm.
nice to just write out a little card or draw a picture
Mm.
with a card for somebody who is, a prisoner of conscience in another country. We can use our creativity to really make a difference in ways
Yes.
that our energy does allow for. And I think that really brings purpose
Yes.
and meaning, and that real sense of self, rather than just being, sounds very negative, but it's how we can feel at times, a failing body. You can just feel like a blob that's
Yes.
not even functioning.
Yes. You can take on what's happening in your body as your identity.
Exactly.
And I think the story, just reflecting on the story of this woman's memory box,
Mm,
what you experience, what you're describing is reaching satisfaction, but also this
absolutely.
this this idea of knowing you exist and there being evidence of it. It's like
Yes.
I wrote a poem once about this fear of looking in the mirror and there being nobody there.
Right.
That I might not exist.
Yes.
This sort of feeling that I was invisible, and it's quite interesting because I'm thinking of the project that we both know about, which is called Millions Missing, and this
Yep.
is about people with ME, and very often what's done is there are pairs of shoes are laid out to represent all the people who are not able to be there in a visible way but still exist. So there's something almost really primal about the
Mm,
need to exist and to have this reflected back. So the letter to the editor gave you this moment of I exist outside this room. I exist outside
absolutely.
this building. Well, I'd like us to take a short break now. This is part of our energy pacing as well. But when we come back, I think, we're going to talk a little bit to listeners about what do you think the obstacles might be psychologically? We know what the physical obstacles might be, but we talk a little bit about the obstacles. And I'm enjoying the creative process today of us. We had a really micro chat before we started, but we said
Mm,
we're not going to disguise the fact that I'm referring to notes and you're referring to notes, that we need to take little breaks because this is a creative process in itself, and we're co-creating something that I really hope is not gonna make either of us feel too awful afterwards. So we'll just go to a little break now. Women of Steel is a podcast for you and for all women who have a story to tell or a listening ear. If you're a crafter, maker or artist, you'll enjoy our episode with Ruth Elizabeth Jones.
Maybe that relates back to now being in my 50s because I've experienced a lot of loss and I know that I can come back from it and that I can triumph again. So that's maybe where the resilience comes from. Just the fact that the passage of time and I've had a lot of knocks, as do most people in their lives. So learning and thinking about how you came back from that knock maybe is part of the resilience strategy.
Those with chronic health are likely to be uplifted by Grace Quantock's episode where we discuss her book, Living Well with Chronic Illness.
And it's okay not to have all the answers right now, but living with a chronic illness isn't, to me, about pushing through or overcoming. It's about finding ways to exist and resist and maybe thrive.
Budding or published writers will have their opinions and ideas when listening to Suzette Mullen and myself discussing writing and our favourite authors.
The bottom line is stories connect us, and sometimes they connect us with experiences and people who are experiencing similar things. I think community saved my life. It really did. I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I really think it did.
Women of Steel is a podcast by women for women based on the premise that sharing our stories is empowering and can be healing. Do let us know who you want on the podcast. Contact details are in the show notes. So welcome back after the break. Today I'm talking to Germaine primarily about her book. There's my dogs joining in. Primarily about her book, Crafting a Path Through Illness, which is coming out, is it in April?
April
2024. So you might be listening to this before the book comes out, but of course, as this pod will be up and out there for a long time, you might be listening to it after you've read the book. But certainly I would really recommend people having a look at this book, whether long-term chronic illness applies to you or not. I think that some of what Germaine was saying before the break about the learning about ourselves and our character and our personality through crafting is relevant to anybody listening. So Germaine, I wanted to go on to talk about our listeners today, and I'm imagining, I really hope, but anyway, that some of our listeners will have a chronic long-term illness, and will be thinking, oh, it's all right for Germaine, she's had all this support and so on, and I can't craft. I'm wondering what sorts of things get in the way for people with chronic illness, both physically, psychologically. What obstacles are there?
Well, physically, obviously, there are the symptoms. There's no ignoring that. Symptoms are a barrier, and there are lots of crafts that I can't do, and there are plenty that I have tried, got excited that this is really good. I really like this, and then after a little session, oh no, my body can't sustain that. I can't do that. Wet felting being one of them. I did love doing that. That took a lot of energy. Though I found some hacks and things which I do put in the book for people with a bit more energy than me. But there will be crafts you can't do. But that isn't insurmountable. And I have to be honest and say I am a lot more ill than many people I know who are chronically ill. So, and I do know people, and I have had online conversations with people who are more ill than me. And they have managed to incorporate creativity into their life. So when I do hear people, and it can be common, hear people say, oh, I can't craft since I got ill. I accept that is true. They can't craft, but in the way they imagine crafting to be, or in the way they used to craft, or they see other people craft. So I think it's about broadening your acceptance of what it means to be creative and to craft, and broadening your expectations, or lowering your expectations, but in a positive way, yes. In a taking the stress off. And because I used to think, well, if I can't knit for an hour and get a good substantial bit of crafting done, what's the point? I'll never create anything, I'll never get anywhere. And I have really learned that 5 minutes crafting is okay. You will get somewhere. And it can be very hard when you're learning to have to keep putting it down. But I mean, as we learn more and more about how the brain works, it's actually been shown that stopping and resting and letting the brain consolidate while you're not learning, letting it consolidate what it has learned, means you can come back to it far more capable than if you just carried on practicing. So all these things that can feel like a barrier may not be the absolute barrier that they at first seemed. And there are, and even if your symptoms are all encompassing and you are lying flat in a bed with curtains shut, perhaps just a red light on because you can't cope with normal light, creativity isn't just about producing. It is, like you were saying before, it is a way of life. And so it's about how we think about things. It's about how we approach existing and navigating the world. And it's also about engaging with other people's creativity. Because let's face it, you can have an amazing artist out there. Okay, that's wonderful for them. But then what happens if nobody sees it? You know, us as viewers of art and appreciators of all kinds of creativity, we increase the life of that piece of work. So even when we feel passive, we might not be as passive as we think we are. And I play sort of creative games in my head, sort of, or I'm lucky in that I can tolerate light, so I can always have my curtains open, usually when it's not a bad migraine day. And I will look at plants and things and flowers, and I'll just sort of study them and sort of think, well, if I could paint that, if I had the energy to move, you know, I'm talking about on days when I am just flattened and unable to do anything, I might think, if I could depict that, how could I depict it? Where would I draw the shadow? What am I actually seeing? Or what texture fabric could I use? Or what stitches? Or what words? Or, okay, I think that is beautiful. How about now I imagine it as something dangerous? What words could I... And I sort of play creative games with myself, and so that there are ways of embracing creativity and crafts, actual physical crafts, without doing them. And that can feed into your abilities for when you have got some energy to actually do something. You're not going into something raw and naive. You've built up all these kind of thoughts to play with. But also, even if you never do, that's still a form of creativity in itself. And you're still engaging with that craft, just on a non-material level.
I love that. I love that. Sorry for interrupting. I'm just thinking of one of the things about being bedbound, and I've been there for times, long times, is observing. And that observing is one of the main things that, if you went to an art lesson, is one of the main things, is observing. So, you know, there's the play of light moving across the room through the day, and I took a photo on my phone of not of my cat, but of my cat in silhouette on the wall with the light, because the cat was sitting on the windowsill. Or sometimes my tree covered in autumn leaves, and then a few weeks later covered in snow, and it's the same view, the same angle, and this is all art.
Yes, and I just wanted to say, your cat photo, to me, that speaks really loudly of your inner situation, because you've taken an oblique picture of a living creature, but just the shadow, just the silhouette. And perhaps on some level that's how you felt at that point, that you were just a silhouette in the world. So our art in that way, something as simple as just, you know, a little click on our iPhone or whatever from bed, can speak volumes about our experience. And so we don't have to be sitting there painstakingly painting away with oil paints or something to express ourselves and
Yes.
produce something creative for somebody else to look at and connect with.
Yes, I've just remembered one of my profile pictures is I went out. I was in a wheelchair and I had a walking stick, and it was in the snow. And I wrote my name in the snow beside a fountain, and that's another one of my photos. And it comes back to me. It's like it really was an adult version of Miriam was here.
Well, that reminds me of Matisse, and he became ill. And so the way he did his art when he became ill was with a long stick. You've just reminded me. And he used it. He taped a pencil or a crayon on the end, and he used it to draw on the wall to show his helpers where he wanted collage pieces stuck. And so there you were, following in not the footsteps, the wheel steps.
Yes, and again, he had helpers. You have helpers. That might be an obstacle for people if they don't feel properly understood and supported. So obviously there's going to be people listening who are supporters and partners and friends and family of people who might just need a little bit of support to get the materials, or the desk space that you've recently shared on Facebook. I think, is it your partner, is it your husband
My
who's
husband,
helped? He's made you this space so that you can move from lying down to sitting and then lying down again very easily.
Well, I call it the nest, because some people would call it empty nest syndrome, but it's my daughter's bedroom. She moved out over 10 years ago now. And so it instantly became my sort of creative room with a day bed in there. Funnily enough, for an art room, it had a bed but not a working table. But that's what happens when you're chronically ill. The bed seems far more important. And then I realised that at times when I am able to sit up a little bit, I am struggling by not having a dedicated table space, because it would mean that I'd perhaps lean or hunch, not be at the right height, or have to sort of move things away. Whereas if I had the dedicated table space, I could just put things out, leave them, shut the door on it, not have to tidy away or, move anything, waste energy. And so I did find this table on Marketplace online, and my husband drove off and picked it up for me, bless him. So that is now near the daybed, so the two are there to use. Lovely. So yes, and he is very supportive, and he does insist that when I have a bit of energy, I use it on something that he can't do for me. So if I am out of bed and trying to put something in the dishwasher, I shouldn't admit to that. That's very naughty of me, and I do get very told off for that, because it makes me ill for no reason, as he points out. It's like, to me, that's nothing. I can pop it in the dishwasher in a moment. To you, huge consequences, completely knock you out. It's as if you're going to make yourself ill, at least do it with something you enjoy and that's expressing you, which is very, very understanding of him. And I haven't always been in that kind of situation.
That's really, really lovely.
I really appreciate that. And I think when you haven't had that in the past, it makes you appreciate it all the more. And this is why I don't take that for granted. And I have got a chapter in the book about how to carve out space for yourself. And that, hold on, let me slow down. I'm running out of breath. I've got a bit excited. Used too much energy. Right. Yes, so I do talk in the book about carving out physical space for yourself, because that is important, in that if you can have some established space, even if that is just a basket by the bed or a lap tray that you pull out that's already got your pencils and paper on it, whatever, it doesn't have to be grand, but whatever it is, it's there ready, so that when you get a little bit of energy, you're not wasting it setting up space or clearing space to work. And then the other thing is the emotional space to do it, and the awareness from family around you that this is important, and that it can be so easy when people are having to do everything for you. Even, my husband, he has to help me wash and help me dry my hair and everything. And when they're doing every little thing, and then you're like, oh, well, I'm just going to do some craft. It can feel really, really selfish. And yet it's not, because the one thing that you have to remember is it may be that crafting is all that's available to you. I mean, if I start to feel guilty, sometimes I think, oh, for goodness sake, I really should be drying my own hair or whatever instead of doing something else. Then I might try and give it a go and realize, no, I really, really can't do that. But I can do these other things. They are within my energy envelope. And so feeling confident in that, and that you are doing what is available to you, that's one thing. And reminding the people around you that this is what I can do. I can't do the others. But also that healthy people turn down things and perhaps ignore the housework sometimes to go out somewhere, or go to a class, go dancing, whatever, go for a walk, do something fun, play a computer game, whatever. We have that right as well. It's not a right, but
need.
Yeah, no, we can consider it a right. And we can give ourselves that right and say, I deserve that, as much as a healthy person. Just because I'm struggling with illness, if anything, you could say, I deserve a bit of pleasure more to compensate for the difficulty. So again, reminding ourselves of that can alleviate some of the guilt. And I think healthy people as well, that's something too, because healthy people, especially women, struggle with so much guilt if they're not doing things for their family, or helping out family and friends in need. So reminding ourselves that we deserve some time for ourselves is important. But one thing, if people do struggle with that, one thing that I think can help to alleviate the guilt is to actually remind ourselves that when we are doing something we enjoy, expressing ourselves and expressing our creativity and externalizing perhaps negative or difficult internal feelings and putting them out in our craft, we are helping ourselves psychologically.
Yes.
And when we do that, we become easier people to be around.
Exactly.
We're happier, and I wholly believe that, well, I can only speak for myself, so I wholly believe that my illness does have a biochemical origin. It is very biological illness, it's very physical illness. And so I say this without wanting to cause offence to anybody who has been told that there are psychological causes to their illness, when perhaps they feel it's not. But every illness, every human body is going to be affected by stress. I mean, that takes its physical toll on the body. So the stress. So if we are alleviating stress and doing things that make us feel lighter and can help us, then that is a physical strategy that can alleviate, not make us better, but just perhaps, if we're lucky, lighten some symptoms that perhaps have been weighed down by stress or psychology.
You've got excitement right now, and the odds are is that you are going to need quite a bit of recovery time after our interview today.
But that's the same as with crafts. If you get overly excited and ambitious, it can knock you back. So again, we have to pace, we have to be careful, we have to adapt how we do it. But just like us creating this today, it will feel worthwhile.
I was just going to say, sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes you know the risk and you go for it anyway, because it's going to be meaningful.
You are putting something out there. It's meaningful just that you achieved it and enjoyed it, but also, if you're lucky, there is an end result as well that you can sort of, when things are really tough, you can look back on and go, that was me. And that still is me, and that's okay. I'm here, I exist, and I'm not just a ghost in the real world, because it can feel like that at times.
Yes.
So,
I'm gonna take an executive decision here for both of us, which is I wanted to ask about the practicalities of writing a book, and you know, it took you a long time and you had to do it bite size, and I'm gonna leave that, and hopefully we can have another conversation about it's a whole creative project on its own. And because I think we you know, we've been talking for an hour. Can you believe it? And you know, this is a very good example of what you know, the sorts of decisions you have to make, which is you might be right at a really good point in your crafting, and it's like, you know,
you have to stop.
I have to put it down. So I just want to say again that this book, Crafting a Path Through Illness, is really looks really beautiful from what I've been able to see. I've pre-ordered it. I'm really excited that my copy will be coming through in a few months, and we'll put all the details up in the show notes. I really, you know, fingers crossed, you'll come on again and talk to us a little bit about how somebody so severely ill can, you know, little by little, minutes at a time, write a book.
That is the key.
But I think, honestly, listening to you today, you have given our listeners so many beautiful thoughts and so much encouragement, but it's not all soft and fluffy. What you're saying is absolutely radical. It's shifting a culture that we live in. You know, it's turning things on its head. It's saying that a woman expressing herself is of value, and that she can choose that over packing the dishwasher, and that's the, you know, that's the revolution, Germaine.
Shouldn't be, should it? In this day and age, it shouldn't be, but for many, it really is.
I mean, it is. You know, I'm a feminist, but it is for me. I really struggle to let go of the idea that I need to tidy up before I can do my thing. And of course, you know, then I never get to do my thing.
There's always something that needs doing. You at some point have to choose your own priorities.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you could summarize your wish for your readers, the people who'll be opening your book, perhaps feeling inspired, you know, joyful, enthusiastic about opening your book. I'm wondering what you say from your heart to those people, what your wish is for your readers.
My real wish is that they feel a sense of community in the book, as well as my voice writing it. I have I've drawn upon a lot of creative people in the chronic illness community for their experiences as well, and I quote other people, and also throughout the world and history, other artists and creators who have had disability or chronic illness impact their creative life for better and for worse, and how they've navigated that. So I really do hope that it makes people feel less alone, less isolated, and less like, because it can feel that you are in a uniquely difficult situation. And of course, everybody's situation is unique to them, but it isn't unusual overall. You know, it's suffering and illness. In the Instagram age, we like to pretend, especially in the West, that we've moved on from these struggles and trials of life in many ways. But this is the reality of life, and people aren't alone. And I really do try. In fact, there is a bit at the beginning of the book where I set the scene by imagining through a paragraph for each person that we are in a virtual craft group for chronic illness, people with chronic illness, and I use the words of people in the community so we can feel that we're hearing people introduce themselves. And I want people to feel through the book that that's what the book is. It's a coming together of people. So we're a disparate community, you know, by the nature of being ill. We're all tucked away in our own homes or beds or, you know, our own lives, but we're all out there rooting for each other and inspiring each other, and by dint of inspiring each other, I mean that the readers can inspire people as well. You know, they can feel inspired by other people going through similar to them, and then express their own creativity, create their own things, and inspire others, and just really find a sense of purpose. So a lot of people feel stripped of purpose when they haven't even got the luxury of having the purpose of choosing perhaps what to wear and to go around a supermarket picking food from the shelf, you know, things like that are a chore to many. That would be a sense of purpose to us on many days, you know.
Yes.
So to be able to, in the book, I give there's a whole chapter on finding purpose and a chapter on making a difference in the world when you feel you're not making a difference. And this could be through craftivism or raising awareness or making gifts for people, all kinds of things. So that's what I really hope, that people rediscover a sense of meaning and purpose and community, and that they feel a valued and valuable member of society. I think that sums up my wish for people.
I hardly know how to follow that. That's just beautiful, and you're certainly making a difference.
Like leaving a footprint.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
No, thank you for using some of your very precious time and energy with us today, and for writing this book, which I think would be a wonderful gift, actually, if there's someone in people's lives who, you know, perhaps is struggling with that feeling of useless, is what I used to really try hard not to call myself, but it's what I felt, that this just might be a beautiful gift. Oh, and somebody has come to give you, no, well, I think that cats know. They very often interrupt conversations to say, you've been talking too long. She is
very communicative, and she knows when it's my rest time. She always does. And actually, is it 1 o'clock-ish? Yeah, there you go. Yeah. She knows I should be lying down.
You should be lying down.
To rest. Yes.
So, I look forward to our next interview, and rest well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for a lovely chat.
Bye. Bye-bye. Comparing ourselves to others seems to me to be a pointless exercise. There'll always be somebody more energetic and more healthy than us, and somebody more severely unwell. There's also this difficulty of comparing ourselves to who we were. We might have changed simply through aging or through illness or trauma. And being where we are, rather than pining for where we used to be or where we think we ought to be, has always been at the heart of my therapeutic approach. Germaine's new book, Crafting a Path Through Illness, is available for pre-order now. Please see the show notes. We would both love to hear from you if you enjoyed our episode, and a gentle reminder that as we are experts in our own health, we respectfully decline unsolicited advice. Thank you. I'm left reflecting on the way that long-term illness sharpens our senses, enhances our skills of observation, and adds real soul and depth to our art. If we value depth, connection, meaning over a job title and salary, we can redefine our goals, and then chronic health or disability need not impede our success. Thank you for listening to Women of Steel, created and hosted by me, Miriam Grace, psychotherapist at Bluesky. If you'd like to know more about my work as a therapist and writer, You can follow me on social media. Please take a look at the show notes for information and contact details. And in the meantime, be kind to yourself.